Hello, my name is Jack Stanley, and I'm the co-founder of the Tech Academy. I'd like to welcome you to the Tech Academy podcast. The Tech Academy operates a 15-week software developer bootcamp. You can find out more at our website, learncodinganywhere.com.
This is an exciting episode. My guest today is Dr. Brent Wilson. I think you're really going to enjoy this. He's one of my closest friends and has also been a curriculum advisor and friend to the Tech Academy for many years. And this was a really interesting discussion. We went a lot of directions in terms of technology, how it intersects with the area of religion and spirit, and a pretty deep dive on security because he's an expert in the security area of computing, which is of great interest nowadays with all the headlines in the news. Anyway, I think you're going to like this a lot. Enjoy Dr. Brent Wilson. It's actually something I've been curious about to talk with you with. For our longtime listeners who may not know this, Brent and I have been friends for a long time. So I've had lots of conversations. But I've never really asked you about this. You're a computer science professor, you're a working programmer, you're a nerd and a geek like me, right? Absolutely. And very much like tech. But you also work at a college that has a strong religious background, right?
Absolutely.
Has there ever been any, what have you bumped into along the way in those quote-unquote two different worlds? Have you found them not to be different? How are those two things of science and religion in your mind?
Well, I think that they definitely coexist without any problems, and I think that they actually complement each other. I know that, of course, if we're talking to the hard scientists, the biologists, the chemists, and that on a Christian campus, you always have the issue of creation and evolution, right? And they go down that road. In the technology piece, the artificial intelligence aspect is starting to raise some issues. Let's just put it that way. It's starting to raise some concerns about simply the ethics and the morals, and again, bringing sort of the spirit aspect into it. And so there's some questions right now. I know that there was actually a lecture about a month ago on our campus from the philosophy professors talking about the ethics and morals of artificial intelligence. Very interesting.
How neat.
And totally non-technical aspect, but looking at just because we can, should we?
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole nother question, right? So those are very interesting things. For me personally, the piece that has been brought up much more recently is in the realm of security and looking at computer security. How do we teach computer security? Now, I'm of the mindset that you have to understand your adversary. And you have to understand the threat environment. You have to understand how your opponents are thinking. What are the tools that they're using? How are they using those tools in order for you to best defend it? That all sounds good, but in practice, what does that mean? It means you teach hacking to prevent hacking.
Yeah.
And now, all of a sudden, it's the whole teaching defense through offense, and that has raised some concerns.
What are the concerns? What's being brought up?
That these are skills that we don't want necessarily our students to understand the offensive approach of this. We would rather have them just understand the defense. And this is where you go, you can't defend what you don't understand.
Yeah.
And so I just actually, this last, month and a half ago, presented a paper at a conference, just published a paper on teaching defensive security through offensive hacking, and really sort of addressed some of those ethical issues of how you do that. And as part of that was very interesting. I surveyed all of my students before they began, and we looked at, I'm going to give you a list of, say, known vulnerabilities and hacks, right? Buffer overflows, injection attacks, you go right down the list. Okay. Do you before we begin the classes, do you understand what these are? Yes or no? Do you feel that you have enough knowledge in any of those areas to actually perform an attack today? And the students 100% were, I sort of understand the names. I think I understand the concept. I have no clue how I would perform an attack. Okay. After the class, you do a similar thing. Oh, and the other part of it, the other question would be that you would add in there. It would be, have you ever thought about using these for either an unethical or illegal activity?
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
And at the very beginning, the percentage was really low. It was like 5 or 6%. Had actually thought about, if I had the skill, boy, it would be neat to be able to do X, right? That type of a thing. After the class, where we also cover laws and the ethics of it and everything, you get to the end and then say, okay, now ask those same types of questions. Well, now they totally understand everything. One would hope.
Yeah.
Right. And then you also ask them, would you use this again? Now, would you use these skills for, are you tempted
for nefarious purposes?
Absolutely. And the percentage goes up. And that's the concern.
Yep.
Because now what you've done is you've introduced to some folks who'd never even considered the possibility, I now have the skill set to do that. So there is that question. There's a human nature to some extent that comes into play. How could I benefit from this?
Yeah.
And so in an institution such as mine, which again, very religious, that's obviously a concern.
Yeah, I can see it.
We trying not to, parents entrust their children to us to come and get an education, not to learn illegal activities.
Right, not how to learn how to be a black hat.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we discussed that. And it's interesting, you brought up black hat, right? So we talk about black hat, gray hat, white hat. And on our campus, it really needs to be white hat and not white hat. Wherein I think...
What is that gray area? That's a slippery slope.
That's right.
What are you actually intending to do here? Your intention isn't to help here, is it?
Right. So in a lot of secular environments, gray hat is seen as a good thing.
Yeah, completely fine.
Completely fine.
Yeah.
And what we try to convey is gray is simply not white. It's simply a different shade of black, right? And so that's the point here, is that it's not, you're not doing these things with the authority and the permission and of whatever corporation you're working with.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's still illegal, even if you're trying to, quote, help.
Right.
Right. How do you justify that? Right. So those are the things that I've run up against lately, which has been very interesting, especially when I presented that paper. The audience, the vast majority of them, it was actually in Utah. The vast majority came from state school systems there in Utah and throughout the Pacific, actually throughout the sort of Rocky Mountain region. So, all the way down through New Mexico, Colorado.
Was the organization you're
a consortium for computer sciences in colleges.
Yeah. You were the chairman.
I'm on the board of directors.
Right, that's right. Okay, good. Yeah.
And so, anyway, a lot of faculty throughout that region was there, and it was interesting because the discussion very quickly turned away from what I would consider to be the academic content of the paper to more of this conversation. What do you mean your administration is questioning this?
Right.
Well,
how can they fight it if they don't know how it works?
How can that be?
Right.
And it was an interesting conversation because it made them go back and realize, now, grass isn't always greener on the other side. And so taking a look at what resources I have, what can I do to better my students, and same for me. I was able to walk away with some suggestions and feedback from other faculty.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so it was an excellent exchange of ideas, and so it's been a lot of fun that way.
That's really neat.
So,
yeah, we're a trade school at the end of the day,
absolutely.
Right? I mean, the closest thing we get into in terms of non-mechanical, here's the technical skills, is work on our overview of software development course to kind of teach, how does a software developer think? But really, that's just a byproduct of how does a computer work as a physical machine. You have to think. You have to know how it works well enough that in your thinking, you're patterning it after its physical limitations and operation. That's how a software developer thinks.
Right.
And then on the soft skills portion of the job placement course, we get into a little bit of that, but that's pretty much common sense. It doesn't enter into like a lot of philosophy.
Right.
But this stuff does matter depending upon where one works in the industry. It'll matter more or less. But I actually think it's a subject that should be looked at even a little more closely. I was talking with one of the members of our board of directors recently about all these initiatives for self-driving cars and machines that can think and automation replacing people and these types of subjects. And it's not an area that I have a clear black and white, I 100% know how I feel about it, but I'm looking like, what is responsible use of technology? I think just being willing to ask the question itself is great, but then you have to come up with answers that make sense and that are based on actual observation of the real world and how people actually are. Like you're talking about. You could just teach them, the threat prevention part of it, but their understanding will be limited because they're not going to understand the other side of how the attacker actually thinks, how they use their tools, the methods, the vectors of approach, and that sort of thing. So,
there's a couple books written, a gentleman by the name of Clifford Stoll. I don't know if you know the name.
Not familiar.
So Clifford Stoll, in a real quick synopsis here, was a gentleman that went to school, UC Berkeley, back in the late 60s.
Oh, wow.
So little anti-establishment.
You think?
You think? Counterculture, right?
Yeah.
Things like that. And long story short, he ended up working for the computer sciences department there, and actually was working on sort of their account management system. Student walks into the labs, they log in, they use X amount of time, they're charged Y dollars, here's your bill, right?
Yeah.
Well, he found a 75-cent computation error. He's like, how can that be? It's a computer. X times Y equals Z. And anyway, he dove into it and found out that they were actually being hacked. This was prior to the fall of communism in the Soviet Union. So this is back in mid 80s, right? So this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
And think of the technology today, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. When you look at the story, it's amazing. Anyway, he actually had to work with the FBI and the CIA and all these folks that he was totally against, and they found out it actually was a hacker from East Berlin at the time.
A German national.
That was coming in, getting onto our military network using Berkeley as the entry point.
Because that was one of the original
huge.
Strongest elements of of ARPANET.
Right. So the interesting part of that story was I got to see him speak once, and he coined the term that he had technolust. That was what he called it. Technology for technology's sake. Not, it's not just because we can, should we? No, if we can, we do.
Right.
Right. That was his whole perspective. And the interesting thing, if you follow his life a little bit, the book is an amazing read. It's called A Cuckoo's Egg. Okay. And it's a great novel. It's a true story, fun read.
Okay.
Then he gets married and has a child. Perspectives change. Now all of a sudden he comes out with another book. I think it's called Silicon Snake Oil, I think is what he titled it. But it's very fascinating because now instead of technology for technology's sake, now all of a sudden he's got this young child running around and he's looking at the world and what are we creating for my children as they grow up, and all of the technologies and things. This is back in the 80s and early 90s, right? We're talking about...
It's not a wired, connected world.
Yeah, it's not a wired... Yeah, absolutely, right? Internet exists, but not to the common man, right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because
Wait. Where did people get their pictures of cats?
Yeah.
Did they come in the mail?
I think there's a thing called film and cameras.
Whoa. Anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, quick tangent. I was unpacking a box the other day. We were going through some storage, and I came across a huge lead bag.
For what? Holding your film canisters?
When you traveled and you went through the X-ray machines. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's so funny. I would watch, like, I travel a lot, right? And you watch young people and they just throw their electronic devices into the X-ray thing, whatever. Every single time I've got my iPhone, I'm like, it's really safe for the, like.
I know. I was thinking, what would happen if you just took that? You don't have to put anything in it. I guarantee you're going to get checked.
Oh, yeah, like, what is this?
Anyway, so
okay. So this guy in his book and
so this guy's book, the whole point,
yeah,
the whole point of this is, here we're talking about these technologies and how they're impacting our lives, artificial intelligence, all these sort of things. He was finally seeing that back then and looking and saying, now instead of just look straight ahead, technology for technology's sake, he started looking to the right and looking to the left and saying, what's the impact on our society? What is this going to do for us? Just because we can, should we? And all of a sudden started having those conversations. It's an interesting transformation for this guy who was counterculture, anti-establishment, right? And all of a sudden, by the time he goes through this experience and has a family, he's really become a conformist, like what he was all against so long ago. It's really
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great read. It's fun to watch. This guy, I say watch because I saw him, but I mean it's a good read.
I've looked into a relatively similar thing, relative to the Manhattan Project and the creation of the the bomb, and many of those early scientists that came out of the initial studies at East Coast colleges like George Washington University and that kind of thing. Atomic molecular phenomena. There was that question. Well, yeah, we can do this thing. We can crack an atom.
But why?
What are we getting out of that? And it became immediately obvious that one could produce a tremendous amount of energy and one could harness that.
That's right.
But one could harness that to turn on the lights in the room or to break a body apart.
Right.
And how do you? These are. I don't know that. I think these have probably been questions and concerns for man from the beginning.
Absolutely.
And this is part of why, at the end of the day, one's own personal morals and ethics, their viewpoint of actually having a definition of right and wrong and some sort of moral compass, it matters. It's part of why, and I didn't address it earlier, I'm really glad to hear that as part of your, training on security, there is an examination of the laws that are, present at this point in time in society about it, but also your own personal philosophy and what's right and wrong about it, so that you're going into it with at least some concept that is not just going to be technology for technology's sake. Oh boy, I can create a little SQL injection attack and become little Bobby Tables and break into something.
Love the cartoon.
So therefore I should.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite cartoons
me too.
ever. For a long time, it was actually a core part of our curriculum on the SQL and database course.
Absolutely.
We made our curriculum 100% original, and I don't know if is it Randall Munroe? I think Randall Munroe is the XKCD artist. Anyway, just like you said, technology for technology's sake. Do you really just no? You have to think about it.
Right, and I think in October, this past October, I had an opportunity to travel back to Asheville, North Carolina, and go to a cybersecurity conference. It was sort of a one-day retreat with a whole bunch of industry folks. And
isn't that furniture capital of the world, Asheville?
I'm not sure. I know it's the fall leaves capital of the world, where everybody goes during the fall.
Gorgeous.
So we were there.
Okay.
But anyway, it was interesting because I had an opportunity to talk to some folks back there, and so many of the individuals I talked to said that as we look forward with cybersecurity in our day and age, number one, we have to keep in mind, it is not a technology issue. It is a human issue. And we can put all the amazing technological solutions in play, but it's the human that will break them every time.
Yep.
And we have to solve that problem. So cybersecurity, while it's grounded in technology, it's a human problem.
Yeah.
It was very interesting because it was just saying that it's not all about the technology. It's the human element. It's that it's the morals. It's the character. It's the integrity.
The political and moral climate, if you will, seems to orient quite strongly around the concept that that man is an animal, that he's a stimulus response machine, and that people are the way they are and they can't change, and that some
Relativism.
Exactly, moral relativism, and the fact that the fact, in air quotes that you can't see on a podcast, that that some people are just basically bad, and they're just going to do bad things, and you have to guard against them.
Right.
And my personal observation of mankind is that at the end of the day, we all have a choice. And that's the most beautiful thing about it, is we all actually have a choice.
Right.
And
absolutely.
when you can have a long enough look, projected far enough into the future, that considers a large enough area of the things that are important to your survival, well, you'll probably make a decision that's going to really help you do well and all the people around you do well for the long term. But that means you need to look. That means you can't just go, oh, it's this way, it's already set in stone, I already know all about it. It means each time you're going to decide, especially something important, you need to look and see what's actually there. And that's that type of call it critical thinking or long-term survival thinking isn't taught.
Right.
You know, and it's part of why I value what you do in the organization you're in. And like I said, obviously we're trade school. We not really the time or place to get into that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but I do believe it's important.
Oh, there is. I mean, I look at the tech talks that I've come and been a part of here at this organization. I love those. I mean, as you know, I'm probably one that comes in and says, no, we're going to do a brown bag before the talk. I want to sit around and let's talk.
Yeah.
Let's talk with everybody. Let's talk about issues that are concerning them. Privacy issues, security issues, or just plain personal things that are going on that, what's your opinion of this or that? And we've had some amazing conversations down there before the Tech Talk. In fact, I think there's been some that's maybe been more valuable than the Tech Talk. But it's been great. And so I've really enjoyed that. And I've enjoyed being able to bring in to this setting the ability for folks to start thinking about, I could use that function, but should I? Mm-hmm. Because that's, people have to be, they have to really evaluate, why are you writing it the way you're writing it? And I don't mean to get all esoteric in writing code, right? It's got to function, it's got to do its job. But the way in which you write it, I mean, you have a responsibility as a developer that you have to write code that not only is efficient and that it runs and that it performs the function, but it also better be easily maintainable. Mm-hmm. Because, the statistics that I have read at numerous times, 80% of cost of software is not in the development, right?
Yep.
It's in the maintenance. Yep. And you have to think about, I can write it this way, but should I? I numerous times, in fact, you'll appreciate this, at my university where I teach, we have on our grading rubric, there is about 15 to 20% of the points, there's just a single line item, and it says elegance. That's it. And there's no arguing for those points. If you lose them, that's because I think this is bad. Yeah. Well, why is it bad? I just don't like it. Mm-hmm. Well, why? Then I don't have. It's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. This is, a great example is taking for those that are listening, that obviously writing code, which the vast majority of you are, is taking a simple if-then-else statement, right? Very basic. You can write that in a way that on the page itself, it takes 4 or 5 literal lines, or you can write it in a way that takes 1 line.
Yep.
Still does the same functionality. But I guarantee you, in a year from now, and business processes have changed, requirements have changed and someone has to come in and make a change, they're going to go down and read that. And if you wrote it in the 5 lines on that piece of paper, that can be changed in 1/10 of the time that it will take if it was written in 1 line.
Amen.
Right?
Oh, I love hearing that.
It's about readability.
Not about being clever.
No. In fact, my elegance points, and I tell the students this, when I'm grading, I've done this long enough, I can read code really fast.
Mm-hmm.
I can scan it. I know right what's going on. If I'm scanning down, okay, page, if I ever have to go, what? You're losing points. Right there. Okay? If it even makes me hesitate to go, what?
Yeah.
That's a point loss, because that's not elegance. Because I should be able to read it. Well-written code is like a well-written novel. And it has to read well. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, then you're not doing it right, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it still may function, still may, perform to the specifications, but...
I couldn't agree with you more. And for me, this has often come down to the willingness of the individual who's creating some sort of written communication, or any communication really, to assume the viewpoint of the actual audience. And in this case, the audience of that written code isn't the computer. You could write it all as one big long line and they would parse through it, right? The audience is actually you in the future when you've forgotten everything, and or other developers that you will never meet. That's the actual audience.
That's right.
You're serving them.
That's right.
Assume their viewpoint. See what they're going to see, almost through self-preservation. What are you going to see 6 months from now when you have to revisit this? Are you going to see, oh, wow, this is my super clever way of doing this all in one line? Or are you going to go, oh, what is that?
What was I thinking again?
Don't do that to yourself.
That's right.
But also don't do it to your future developer teammates that you'll never meet.
Yeah, I jokingly say in my classes that you need to code as though the person coming behind you to maintain your code is a homicidal maniac. Okay? I mean...
That's awesome.
I mean, it's sort of a bad, dark side, but...
Jason, web developer.
But it's so true. I look at the projects that I've worked on, across this country, and so many times it takes, 80% of my time is just coming up to speed on what they've done.
Yeah.
Where I could have reduced the cost to that company had someone coded well.
Yeah.
And, what style? I have people ask me, well, what style do you use? And you use this or that, or, I said, it's really a simple question. The style is dictated by who signs your paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's that simple. And so in a classroom setting, I'm signing your paycheck.
Right.
Okay? So you need to follow my style, period. If you're working, all of a sudden you get your first job and they come in and they want you coding, here's our style sheet, here's how we want you to code. And you look at it and go, well, I don't agree with that. You just took the job.
Yeah.
So yes, you do agree with that. Right. And it's almost a customer service aspect. It's getting people to understand that
you're not there to be right, to maintain your rightness. You're there to be effective.
That's right.
You can't be effective as part of a team if everybody isn't working roughly on the same page. You don't get to dictate that. In a really good dev shop, you have an input on that, but at the end of the day, you're not the one that decides.
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
That's awesome.
For those who know the reference.
That is great.
But it's true, and it does drive me nuts. I've hired over my 24 years at my university, I've hired a lot of students to work on projects for me outside in consulting. And, I'll get students come in that are just, young, they're excited, they're sharp, and boy, I want to do it. I said, no, I'm not going to hire you. I will take this mediocre person over here over you. Mm-hmm. Well, why is that? Because they're teachable.
Yeah.
Because they will follow direction to the letter, and I don't have to worry about it. I will have to micromanage, and I don't want a high maintenance developer. I can't afford to have that.
Yep.
You might be brilliant and you could solve this problem in 20 minutes and it might take this other person 2 hours, I'll pay that 2 hours, because in 6 months when we have to revisit it, that edit that I have to make will take us 15 minutes. Yours will take me 5 hours because I have to come up to speed on what novel thing that you put in here. Okay.
I had to rewrite the entire parsing engine for a XML based credit report on a project a couple of years ago, where the guy that did it, he did that exact thing. It was very interesting code.
Right.
It was very, like, you could almost see that he was being interesting in how he wrote it, but it wasn't effective. It was unlike every other set of code that we had in the whole solution, and didn't fit well.
So it's an outlier.
And I had to rewrite the whole thing.
Right.
Like,
Well, see, and I think as a developer, one thing you can do is sort of your mantra, right? I mean, something that you hold on to. It's hard to be, It's hard to be simple enough to be good.
Yeah.
And if you approach problems that way, you can be an amazing developer. And obviously document well. If so much of the code that I have in production, if there's, let's call it 100 lines of code out there, there's probably 150 lines of documentation on it.
Oh, that's great.
And
yeah.
Because don't ever leave somebody coming behind you having to figure anything out. Should never have to figure anything out. Yeah. It should be laid out so simple. And if we as an industry can get to that, we'll make huge progress, not only just in functionality, but in security. Because when we're novel, we introduce vulnerabilities because we're not thinking of the big picture.
Oh, that's great.
And so it's really important to step back and take things very simple. My perspective.
No, it's a great perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everybody has a right to, their point of view and communicate it, but yours is an extremely well-informed and based on practical experience point of view, so it's very welcome. Well, thank you for sitting down with me.
Well, thank you. Awesome. I enjoy coming up here and visiting with the students and tech talks. This was an enjoyable time to sit and communicate. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jack Stanley again, co-founder of the Tech Academy. I'd like to leave you with a suggestion. We call this Jack's Random Tips. Today's tip is, I think a lot of people do this naturally, but it's best to look at things with a balance of criticism and positivity. Allow me to explain. Some people focus too hard on negativity, ignoring valid, positive characteristics. On the other hand, some people are overly optimistic and ignore the most obvious red flags. Have you ever met someone who was never satisfied and constantly criticized everything? They probably weren't too happy in life. How about someone who saw only good in people and so got taken advantage of or hurt? A good solution for both is to balance. Consider the good and the bad. Don't ignore either. A common trick I have used is similar to a pros and cons list. If the bad outweighs the good, I avoid that choice. This is especially useful when making an important decision. Look over all areas of life and confront the good associated with the decision and the bad. Sometimes one bad aspect can negate everything else. The reverse can also be true. I've seen too many people pass up good opportunities or make poor life choices by simply not viewing every aspect of a proposition. I actually found a cheesy quote on the subject from an author named D.H. Sidebottom. Stars can't shine without darkness. And again, if you are interested in enrolling in our Software Developer Bootcamp, please visit our website, learncodinganywhere.com.